And good afternoon, everyone. This is Patrick, and welcome back to Underdog Dueling, where we take a look at hidden gems and archetypes that people might be sleeping on and compare their relevance to today's meta. So as always, I have another deck profile for you guys, and this one is unique in that it is the very first ritual deck to ever hit Tier 0 status, and that is Nekroz. So Nekroz is a ritual strategy that revolves around basically kind of being anti-meta, punishing your opponents for using the extra deck, and being able to summon out multiple at once using certain cards. Now, to go over a few things about Nekroz, here's a few things that we need to keep in mind. So, the Nekroz generally have summoning restrictions, and they are divided up into a few different level categories. Your level 3 and 4s must be ritual summoned in any fashion, but no ultimate restrictions. The level 5 and 6 monsters can't use another copy of themselves as the ritual material, and then levels 7 through 10 cannot be ritual summoned using a monster of that same level. So if you had a level 7 Nekroz ritual monster, you couldn't just use one level 7 monster, but we do have a variety of ways to get around some of these restrictions. On top of that, they all have effects when discarded, whether that is searching, protection, or destruction. And I am also running the Dogmatica engine, which further punishes the opponent for using their extra deck, because we use our extra deck as more of a resource rather than in ultimate endgame. But I will go ahead and get into it, and if you want to see more, please remember to like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at Soren's Lair. Alright, and let's go ahead and get into the deck profile, starting off with our main deck non-ritual monsters. I am running 3 copies of Shuri, Strategist of the Nekroz. So this is a warrior monster that has the effect to where if you ritual summon exactly one Nekroz ritual monster with a card effect that requires the use of monsters, this card can be used as the entire requirement. And if this card is tributed by a card effect, you can add a warrior type ritual monster from your deck to your hand. And you can only use this second effect once per turn. So this is your main starter, to where it can act as a substitute for any monster, which means it can be utilized as a substitute as many times as you're able to bring it out, whether from your hand, in the graveyard, or even being banished. This is a card that you kind of want to see more often, and we do have a couple of warrior type Nekroz ritual monsters to be able to set up for further plays. Then to help the strategy out, I am just running 2 copies of Gishki's Shadow. So the Gishki is another water ritual-based archetype, but I'm only running these 2 because they function exactly like Shurit, to where if you ritual summon exactly one ritual monster with a card effect that requires the use of monsters, this card can be used as the entire tribute, basically just as a way to help get our plays off. Now for the actual Nekroz ritual monsters, first we have 2 Nekroz of Colossalus. So when discarded, you can add a Nekroz Speller Trap from your deck to your hand. Then during either player's turn, you can target one monster that was summoned from the extra deck. Its attack becomes 0, and its effects are negated. We only run this at 2 because it's pretty easy to get our materials on board, and we do have ways of recycling them, but this is just a good way to try and take out one of your opponent's monsters that might be a lot harder to get rid of, and plus being able to search out any of our ritual cards is always a benefit. Now for one of the main highlights of our deck, I am running 3 Nekroz of Unicorn. Its discard effect allows you to add a Nekroz card to your hand, except a copy of Unicorn, and then it negates the effects of all face-up monsters on the field that were summoned from the extra deck. Effectively, this is going to be your main go-to Nekroz that you want to summon out as soon as possible, because the moment it hits the field, it is a blanket-wide negate and shuts off all of your opponent's effects, which means unless the summon is negated, it can't be responded to in any capacity. Then play just 1 copy of Nekroz of Cataster, our level 5. His discard effect allows you to special summon a Nekroz monster in your graveyard, including something like Shurit, or even something like Unicorn, or any of our other ritual monsters that were ritual summoned already. And then at the start of the damage step, when a Nekroz monster you control battles an opponent's monster that was summoned from the extra deck, it is automatically destroyed before going into damage calculation. So if this card can't beat over a particularly powerful monster, and it is not immune to effect destruction, this makes it to where any of your monsters can beat over what you need. Though we only run the 1 because while it is pretty good, it can be hard to utilize, and it all just really depends on the current metagame. Then for other main Nekroz monster that we want to see more often, I currently have 2 Nekroz of Brainiac. Ideally you want to run this at 3, so I have to wait until I get a third one. Its discard effect allows you to add any Nekroz monster from your deck to your hand except a copy of itself, and then you can target up to 2 face-up monsters on the field that were summoned from the extra deck and shuffle them back in, basically being able to get rid of any problem monsters that might show up, especially if you are going second, which you want to do most of the time, as we don't really have too many ways of playing around going first to where we run the risk of a lot of disruption from our opponent. Then we have our level 7 Nekroz of Gungnir. As mentioned, all the other ones cannot be summoned using one monster of the same level. Her discard effect allows you to target a Nekroz monster you control, and it can't be destroyed by battle or by card effects, giving it some inherent protection. And then you can discard 1 Nekroz card if this card's on the field and destroy it. And both of these are quick effects, so they can be done on either player's turn. These higher level monsters we only typically run one of because they can be hard to summon out, and they're ones that we want to save for the likes of Shurit and Gishki Shadow. And then next we have our level 8 Nekroz of Valkyris, which can't be summoned by using any level 8 monsters. And its discard effect allows you to banish a Nekroz card from your graveyard to negate any one attack and automatically end the battle phase. And during your main phase, while this card is up on the field, you contribute up to 2 monsters from your hand or your side of the field to draw the same number of cards. This is a good way to try and recur some of your resources, getting them in the grave for future plays, or being able to refresh your hand. Next, we have Nekroz of Trishula, our level 9, who can be summoned using any level 9 monsters. His discard effect allows you to negate the activation of a card that targets a Nekroz monster you control. And then when this card is ritual summoned in any capacity, you can banish exactly 3 of your opponent's cards, 1 each from their hand, field, and graveyard, with the one in the hand being chosen at random. Now, keep in mind the wording on this, as there needs to be at least one card in each location, otherwise this effect will not trigger. And then for our last Nekroz monster, we don't run any of the level 10s, mostly because I don't have them yet, but I do run the one level 11, Nekroz of Sophia. She is played as a one-of because she is a very hard to summon monster. She can only be ritual summoned by using 3 monsters you control with different types, and can't be summoned by other ways. And then during either player's main phase 1, you can discard this card and 1 Nekroz spell card, and your opponent can't summon monsters from the extra deck. However, if you do manage to ritual summon this card, you banish all other cards on the field and in the graveyard, though you can't normal summon, set, or special summon other monsters the turn you activate this effect. So basically, she is just kind of a way to have an absolute board wipe if you have the setup for it, because of her restriction, you have to have all of your monsters set up and make sure that they equal exactly 11 stars, which is a recurring theme in the Nekroz deck, typically requiring exact numbers. I'm only running her at 1 copy just because she is a good extra deck lock if you manage to draw into it and your opponent goes first, potentially shutting off all of their plays, because the first turn outside of your draw phase and your standby phase is just your main phase 1 and then the end phase. So just kind of a good card to have around. Next, we are going to go into the Dogmatica package, starting with 2 copies of Ecclesia the Virtuous. So she can't be destroyed by battle with a monster special summoned from the extra deck. And then if a monster summoned from the extra deck is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. And when she is summoned in any capacity, you can add any Dogmatica card from your deck to your hand, but you can't summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. As mentioned earlier, we don't use our extra deck in any capacity except to fuel a lot of our card effects. So this allows you to search any card that you might need to help further your plays. And again, it is a free special summon that sets up for anything else that you might need. Only run her at 2 because we can cycle through her very quickly. Next, I run 1 copy of Dogmatica Fleur-de-Lis, the Knighted. So she can be special summoned on either player's turn if there is a monster summoned from the extra deck on the field, and then if you control another Dogmatica monster, like Ecclesia, you can negate the effects of 1 card on the field until the end of the turn, and then when a Dogmatica monster declares an attack, you can make all monsters you currently control gain 500 attack. So she is a good 2500 point wall that can sit there and give you a little bit of extra protection, especially if you can negate the effects of one of your opponent's monsters. And again, just as a good one-up that can also be used as a defensive wall with 2500 defense. Next is Dogmatica Maximus, who is a 3000 defense wall, and he can be special summoned by banishing one fusion, synchro, exceeds, or link monster from your graveyard. And then during your main phase, you can send 2 monsters with different names from your extra deck to the graveyard, and your opponent sends 2 monsters of their choice from the extra deck to the graveyard. So this is one that you have to be careful of with the matchup, because there are some decks that like having their extra deck monsters in the graveyard, and we do run a few ourselves that trigger when they go to the graveyard, but this allows you to kind of figure out what your opponent might have planned. So depending on the matchup, this can either be a great boon, or you might accidentally leverage their own plays. Lastly, we run one Dogmatica Nexus, so it must be special summoned by targeting 4 Fusion, Synchro, Exceeds, and or Link monsters, and banishing them. And this can be from either player's graveyard, so if there is already a bit of setup, you're pretty good to go. And if this card battles a special summon monster, you destroy all of your opponent's attack position monsters, similar to Mirror Force, and then inflict 800 points of damage for each Fusion, Synchro, Exceeds, and Link monster destroyed by this effect. This is a 3200 beater, so it will be able to beat over anything, and it also destroys your opponent's monsters if they are all sitting in attack. Then next we run a small series of cards called impcantations. These cards can all be summoned from the hand by revealing either a ritual monster or a ritual spell, and then you can summon out any corresponding one from the deck, and they all have different effects when summoned from the deck. Talismandra can add a ritual monster from your deck to your hand. Candle searches a ritual spell. Bookstone can target a ritual spell in your graveyard and add it to the hand. And Pencil Plume does the same with ritual monsters. This is just a good way to kind of get your plays started if you are missing any of your required materials. And since it locks you out of summoning from the extra deck, they also just make really good tribute fodder. And next we're going to go into our spells and traps, starting off with our Nekroz ritual card. So we have 2 copies of Nekroz Cycle. This allows you to tribute monsters from your hand or field, then ritual summon 1 Nekroz ritual monster from your hand or graveyard, whose level exactly equals the total level of those monsters. And then if you control no monsters, you can banish this card and 1 Nekroz monster from your graveyard to add any other Nekroz spell card from your deck to your hand. All of our ritual spells share this same effect, so it's a good way to just recycle them as much as you can. We then have 2 copies of Nekroz Mirror. So Nekroz Mirror allows you to tribute monsters from your hand, field, and or banish Nekroz monsters from your graveyard to summon out a monster whose total levels equal to those monsters. And it has the same effect to be able to add another spell from your deck to your hand. This one is nice because if you can get monsters in the graveyard through their discard effect, then this allows you to summon them right back, so that way you can summon them at a later point. And then perhaps the linchpin of this entire deck is Nekroz Kaleidoscope, which we run 3 of. So this card allows you to summon any number of Nekroz ritual monsters by tributing 1 monster from your hand, field, or 1 monster from your extra deck, whose total levels exactly equal the level of that monster. So this one is really good because it allows us to send a high level monster from our extra deck to be able to get multiple summons from our hand, which could be very beneficial. And it also just allows us to get the monsters from the extra deck that like being sent to the graveyard to be able to trigger their effects. We do run this at 3, though you do have to be careful and try and keep an eye on your levels. So it's good to run an extra deck with a variety of levels so we can use them to their fullest advantage. Next, I'm running 3 copies of Preparation of Rites. Preparation of Rites has the effect where you can add 1 level 7 or lower ritual monster from your deck to your hand, and then you can choose to add 1 ritual spell from your graveyard to your hand. This is a good way to recur your resources and potentially ritual summon multiple times in a turn. However, do keep in mind that your ritual spells do often have a hard once per turn on their summon effects, so you might have to wait until the next turn or find a way to get a different one in the grave. Then I've got 2 copies of Ritual Cage. It is a continuous spell to where you take no battle damage from attacks involving a ritual monster you control, and all ritual monsters you control can't be targeted or destroyed by monster effects. This gives a little bit of extra protection if you don't have any of the higher level monsters in your hand to discard for their own protection effects. And since the majority of the metagame is revolved around monster effects, this is just kind of a failsafe should things begin to go south. Then the last of the spells we run is Nadir's Servant. This is another Dogmatica card. This allows you to send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard to then add 1 Dogmatica monster or Fallen of Albaz from your deck to your hand that is attack less than or equal to the monster that is in the graveyard. But you can't summon monsters from the extra deck, similar to all of the other Dogmatica cards. So this is more setting up our graveyard from the extra deck, but we don't run Fallen of Albaz, but this does grab any Dogmatica monster with equal or less attack, and most of the time you kind of want to either get something like Ecclesia or Fleur-de-Lis or even Maximus, as Nexus is generally a little too powerful to be searched unless you send a really high level monster from your extra deck to the graveyard. And then finally we run 3 copies of Dogmatica Punishment, and by extension, our final main deck Dogmatica card. So this allows you to target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, send a monster with an equal or higher attack from your extra deck to the graveyard, and destroy that monster. But until the end of the next turn, you can't summon monsters from the extra deck, and you can only activate 1 Dogmatica Punishment per turn. So, similar to Nadir's Servant, this allows you to get whatever materials you need in the grave to trigger their effects, and also interrupt your opponent's plays at a moment's notice. And that is all for the main deck. Our extra deck is unique in that we mostly run a variety of high-level monsters to use with Nekroz Kaleidoscope, or if we use Nadir's Servant, to grab something like Dogmatica Nexus. But I do want to show you the key components of the extra deck that we'll be utilizing more often. First is Titaniclad the Ash Dragon. So its effect when sent to the graveyard during the end of the turn, you can add to your hand or special summon any 1 Dogmatica or Fallen of Albaz from your deck. This could also be sent in because it's 2500, it works well for Dogmatica Punishment or Nadir's Servant, and allows you to set up your plays for the future. Again, we don't summon any of these monsters, we are just using them for the graveyard effects, but I will have the card listed on screen for you to read the full effect. Then we have 2 copies of Herald of the Arclight. So this is a level 4 synchro monster who has the graveyard effect to enable you to add 1 ritual monster or ritual spell from your deck to your hand. This effect is not once per turn, so if you manage to get both of them in the grave in some capacity, you can ensure that you can set up your Nekroz rituals for next turn. And finally, we have 3 Elder Entity Entis, and her graveyard effect pops a card on the field. And similar to Herald of the Arclight, this is not once per turn, so if you can trigger this multiple times, all the better. And similar to Titaniclad, she also has 2500 attack, which can destroy a wide range of cards utilizing Dogmatica Punishment. And if you're able to combine Punish it with something like Nadir's Servant on the next turn, then you're good to go. But that is all we have for the Nekroz strategy. I do hope you enjoy. I really love this deck as it is an anti-meta strategy, and it can shut down your opponent's plays if utilized correctly. But that is all we have for today. And of course, if you want to see more, just remember to like and subscribe. But until then, signing out.